What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns back with you. Post schedule coming out. Enjoyed Kevin's watchability rankings. Liked him bringing that to the show with me not being here. That was a good job by Kevin.
I enjoyed you going viral.
Yeah. That snuck up on me because I wasn't really paying attention. I addressed all that on CHGO yesterday. People, because you know what time of year, Jahns, you know this. We're in that time of year where you're not allowed to say anything negative about anything or people lose their minds. Not even like I personally don't like the schedule. Can't do that. It's against the rules.
So we're going to do a schedule episode instead.
Yeah. So, all right, here's what's coming up on today's show. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns, at Hoge and Jahns is our show account. You can go to hogeandjahns.com to get all of the merch, including the shirt that Jahns is wearing today. All of that is up at hogeandjahns.com. So we're going to keep the schedule conversation going a little bit, but in a different way, because, you know, The Athletic has an awesome sports media reporter who's been around forever and does an outstanding job. Richard Deitsch hosts a sports media podcast. I was listening to his pod. I listen to his pod a lot because I'm interested in a lot of sports media stuff, and listened to his episode on the NFL schedule last week. Wanted to bring some of that conversation to this show. So he's going to join us here in a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about OTAs, and because we have an open OTA practice on Thursday this week, just what we're kind of looking forward to. So we'll get to that on the back end of the episode as well. But I want to have a little bit of fun to start this. And this is probably not the best way to bring in Richard Deitsch to the show, but we're always transparent on this show. That's what I've always loved about it as we head into season 10, believe it or not, of this podcast. But if you haven't noticed, and I find this remarkable, Adam Jahns' complete and utter lack of interest in the schedule release or anything that has to do with it from a television media standpoint, it is honestly impressive. I was talking to Kevin off the show after I listened, because I listened to your guys' episode from last week when I was coming back from Minnesota. And a lot of this is more off the air. You do a good job on the air, I think, of faking it. But you
now you're calling me out.
You seriously don't care about this at all. I find it so interesting.
I've been like this for a few years. Yeah, I'll be honest. The schedule release day does not excite me. I find the videos cute.
It's a good. No, honestly, I'm with you on that.
I'll put them that way. Like that makes it fun. If I'm thinking selfishly, like I root for like trips to the desert or California in the winter. Like there's certain cities I want to go to, but just in terms of the build up, the extra attention the entire week has for that whole day of certain leagues. I don't know. Just give me the whole thing at once. I don't care. I'll say this. I do not like Thursday night games. Not a fan of Thursday night games because traffic and travel. But yes, I do have. I'm trying to think what's the best word for it. I am generally indifferent towards the schedule release. You're calling me out.
I'm not even trying to call you out. I don't have any problem with it at all. I'm just, it amazes me. Like, because I find a lot of this interesting. We've known the opponents since the season ended, but the schedule still matters so much. The order in which you play the teams, how the amount of rest that you have between games, like has an enormous impact on how your season actually plays out.
That stuff does interest me because that affects the actual football. But in terms of like which network or which streamer, which app, which Netflix, which Amazon Prime, like who gets it, like that does not interest me at all. Like I kind of enjoy the different opinions you get on such broadcasts. There's a whole range of expertise you could get outside of maybe ESPN or Fox now that I enjoy, but just in terms of the alignment, I take note of like the end of the Bears schedule this year where they have 3 games in 10 days. That's rough. That's not good. From a coverage standpoint, that changes my job a bit, but for the players, that's awful. So that affects the football. But in terms of who broadcasts which games, I could care less.
Yeah, see, and I get that might be more niche stuff that I care about a little bit more. The broadcast deals, the money that comes in from it, Christmas on Netflix. I totally get that that's more niche, but I just want to have some fun with it coming out because I'm not sure there's a topic that you and I have a broader spectrum of interest in, because I probably overdo it, admittedly. And then and maybe it's because with CHGO, you know, we're doing shows every day still, and it's May and the draft's over, and we got to find stuff to really dive into. And you're just like, what baseball game do I have to coach today?
100%. 100%. I would say my indifference extends to also like the broadcast teams. And I know you're more into that. Maybe that's because I've spent now 13 years not listening to the broadcast teams because I'm actually in the stadium. But I do find certain, like last year, I enjoyed writing a column off the Amazon Prime broadcast just because of all the time that they spent with the Bears. And you try to pick things out of that, right? Because we've talked to Adam Amin about this. Those production meetings are invaluable to their job, but you also get little tips and feelings about how the organization feels about things through those. So I like doing that column, but yeah, I don't know. Am I like the minority on this?
I don't know. I mean, look, I probably not. I don't know. I think it's probably split. I mean, we've gotten a lot of feedback in the last week or so. I'm not necessarily this show, but probably more so on CHO. Just like, how many times are you guys going to break down the schedule? I get it. It's not for everyone. But I do get in the weeds with the broadcast stuff. So anyway, this was a long intro of bringing in Richard Deitsch, who not only cares about this stuff, but does a phenomenal job covering it and knows the ins and outs and all the relationships of the broadcasters and the TV execs. And when there's news to break, he's on top of it. And the money, because here's one thing, whether you care about it or not, we all know that TV rights are driving revenue in all of the major sports. And honestly, you're about to see this with the WNBA, even as the interest skyrockets with that. But certainly with the NFL, and case in point, just as simple as it can be for even the person who doesn't care about this stuff at all. Bigger TV rights. Why did the salary cap go up as much as it has, but especially this year, to even unexpected numbers that we've even been talking about from the football side for so long. So it definitely has an impact on your teams that you care about and all that. So anyway, I am very excited to bring in Richard Deitsch to the show to have some of this conversation. Because we both are, but we haven't really gone deep into this stuff before, I think, and I don't think we've had Richard on before, so I'm really excited about that. Let's bring him in to talk about some of these things that happen behind the scenes, but especially relevant as the NFL schedule comes out. All right, let's bring in Richard Deitsch, who does a great job with all of his coverage, across the media landscape, especially with the Athletic and the Sports Media Podcast. Richard, I've been listening to your pod for a long time. I do find this stuff very, very interesting. I found, we're a Bears show, so we're going to kind of talk about those specific angles, but I have some, broader questions for you as well on the back end. I know maybe it's just because we've been so wrapped up in Caleb Williams mania since really last fall, if we're being honest, before the NFL season even ended. But I was surprised when the schedule came out, and I know you guys actually touched on this in your schedule release episode you had last week, kind of early on in your show, that the Bears and Giants were two large market teams that didn't really get featured as much as you would have thought. Were you surprised at all by the lack of primetime games and exclusive window games that the Bears got with Caleb Williams?
Well, first, good to be with you guys. Appreciate that. It's always kind to say you've listened for a while. Just it's a nice way of saying I'm very old. So I appreciate it. It's very kind to do that in an elegant way. The one thing that writing about the schedule release as many times as I have, and obviously talking to the NFL broadcasting people, is that people in each individual market obviously are very hypersensitive to what happens to their teams. And by and large, there's not conspiracy theories going on. Kevin Costner's not walking into the courtroom sort of back and forth, a JFK joke there. And so I'm not sure I was surprised that the Bears didn't get more primetime games, because I think if you're if you're looking at it from the league perspective, while they have what looks to be a really good future, there's still not really a proven NFL viewership draw nationally. And so you have to sort of, if you look at sort of the map as these guys do, and obviously all the different permutations that they do, you're going to have a couple teams that are going to be around the 3 or 2 primetime games number, because everybody can't be the Chiefs. You know what I mean? Everybody can't get as many primetime games as the Cowboys will. So when I first saw the Bears, well, I do think they're like a really, really interesting team. And I think their first round picks this year are like fascinating. I wasn't surprised. And I don't necessarily think, again, it's the NFL doing anything other than the Bears feel like the Lions were 1 year before, where they're maybe 1 year away from the league investing in them in a serious way for primetime games. The other thing I would say is this. In talking to the broadcast networks over the last couple of years, I've not heard many of them sort of go out and say, like, we're really looking for like this Bears game, or, where they absolutely will be like, Chiefs Bills was, number 3 or 4 on our list. We really desperately wanted to get the Super Bowl rematch. You know what I'm saying? So until the Bears have sort of, I think, proven to have a little bit more success, I don't think the broadcasters are going to make that pitch. I will say, if they ever do get good, though, we're talking 3rd biggest market in the country, significant viewership possibilities. I'm sure the league desperately wants them to be good, but I'm not sure you can put them on primetime personally until, to me, they're a legitimate like playoff discussion team.
I feel like the Bears have always had a couple primetime games, like every year, even like the bad teams that we have covered, like really bad teams, Richard, like still on primetime just because they draw. Like, I'm curious, like in your conversations with, the broadcast teams, they're like, are there just certain markets where they could always just count on, like, hey, look, Chicago's bad again, but it's Chicago. People are going to watch. We could count on good numbers just because it's the Bears.
Well, first of all, Adam, I would say this. Even if the Bears suck, you still live in Chicago, one of the greatest cities in the world. So there's really nothing bad about that. Or as I like to say in Toronto, we like to call the Chicago of Canada. I mean, I think there's value in the Bears being in a primetime slot or a 425 slot because, like, it's, again, a big, big market. And, based on just simple population and data numbers, you have the chance to get a bigger audience. But by and large, ratings-wise, when it comes to, like, percentage of households, there are better markets. Kansas City's a much better market than Chicago right now in terms of the percentage of fans in that market watching. Buffalo, et cetera. So, again, I don't think it's like any kind of inherent bias against the Bears, because I think if you really asked all the networks, like, their dream scenario would be Dallas, obviously, to be great, because obviously the Cowboys sort of remain the national team. And then they would love for these big market teams to be great. You'd love for the Giants and Jets to be good. You'd love for the Bears to be good. Quite frankly, you'd love for Los Angeles to be a better television market, because the Rams, even when they were good, it's not really a great TV market. My sense is it's not a great TV market because LA fans for so long were able to get all different teams when they didn't have a team there, and it probably didn't build up equity for a home team. But I sort of would go back to what I said at the beginning. I think the Bears have to get into a position of where the Lions were 2 years ago, where the schedule makers and the broadcasters think, okay, let's be ahead of the curve on this. I would say this, and I'm fairly convinced of this. Let's say the Bears go 8-8, 9, and it's actually 6-17 games. My apologies. So let's say they go 9-8. I guess a phenomenal year would be like 10-7, or even like 7-10. I think if they do that this year, then I think the discussion for the broadcasters next year is very, very different. And I think you'll have, I think you'd have actually everybody, CBS, NBC, Fox, Amazon, et cetera. I think they'd all ask for more Bears games next year, because I think they would make the thought that this is a team that has real playoff possibilities. Obviously, so much presumes on how great Caleb Williams is and how, how the rest of the Bears skill position players are. But if you project these guys to be great and they turn out to be really good, the Bears feel like, to me, like, again, where the Lions are, maybe where the Texans were this year heading into this coming schedule. I think the Bears have a good future, at least in terms of, if you want to think about in terms of prime time kind of windows. The last thing I'll just say is this, not the filibuster, but all the primetime discussion is great. What really tells broadcasting that you're a good team is when you're in the 425 spot, because that's
I wanted to ask you about that, Richard, because they have 0 425 games. That's Eastern time for those.
And that tells you about, honestly, that tells you more of what broadcasters think of the Bears than lack of primetime games, because the 425 Eastern time zone spot on Sunday is the most important piece of content in essentially, I would argue, in entertainment. There's nothing else that can guarantee you over 20 million Americans watching, maybe with the exception of some blockbuster movie that they'll all sort of gather around. But even that's not when we were younger, like you might have been able to say that like some new Star Wars movie comes out or something like that. There's no guarantees anymore, even with movies. But the one thing I can guarantee you is on Sunday at 425, on the back end of that doubleheader, Fox or CBS are going to get over 22 million viewers. So that's the most important real estate. And the Bears not being there, to me, tells you more than just getting 3 primetime games. So again, that's something I would watch. Now, Fox and CBS would say, well, we love having the Bears at 1 because it helps us with our early afternoon numbers. Yeah, sure, it does. But if you really sort of believe that this was a massive viewership team, you would be imploring or lobbying the league to get them at 425.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's something that not enough NFL fans really understand about the business of all this behind the scenes, because and I'm guilty of it too. Like, we think about this as primetime games, night games, because it feels like that's when we're sitting around always watching the games. But in reality, that late afternoon window is so profitable for these networks. And one more thing just on this before we kind of switch topics a little bit. You were talking a lot about projecting the Bears going forward. One of the most difficult things that these networks and Mike North and company that put the whole schedule together, they're trying to project even in season, which is why we have flexing and all these, crazy things that go on. But I couldn't help but notice, like the Jets are featured a lot in primetime early in the season, not so much late. And the Bears actually have 3 of their last 6 games in exclusive windows when you also include the Thanksgiving game against the Lions. So I wonder if they are actually banking on the Bears being interesting in December, because they are backloaded with their primetime games.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that when is the Texans game with the Bears? Is that week 2?
That's week 2.
Okay, so
that's Sunday Night Football.
That's the interesting one to me in terms of the Bears schedule, in terms of you want to think nationally, because ESPN is going to try to hype that game pretty good. They obviously are hoping that it's a matchup of 2 quarterbacks who could be the future of the league heading forward. So it's an interesting Bears game, just if you just want to think of it as a media sort of observation. And I'll be curious to see how much ESPN puts into that. To get to your other point, I think the league front loaded the Jets because I think you're probably trying to protect in case Aaron Rodgers gets hurt. That's just a guess. I mean, again, Mike North and the NFL broadcasting people will tell you, and I believe them. I mean, the NFL spins, as you both know, on some things. I don't think they're spinning on this. They throw in 4,000 different schedules. They could, so many of these schedules could be great, like that they didn't choose, and they ultimately end up wherever they end up. On the Jets one, it feels to me that you want to gamble you'd rather gamble with them early than late, because they have a quarterback who obviously is old and just was out for the season. And if if the Jets turn out to be good, you could always flex them late in the year into better spots, right? And week 17, 18, et cetera. The Bears, I don't know what to read of the Bears sort of being more featured late in the year, other than maybe just that's sort of how the schedule worked out. When I was on a call with the NFL broadcasting group where they sort of did like they had like, maybe you guys were on too, like whatever, 50 reporters on there. And they
I know what you're talking about.
I remember the one game that they were highlighting with the Bears, if I'm correct about this, was that week 2 game. And they seemed to be very excited about CJ Stroud versus Caleb. And I think, it does matter if the Bears play well in that game, it would have an impact in the back of like some television executives or streaming executives mind. The Bears do have, but again, the Bears have a lot going for them in the fact that, again, they're in one of the world's great cities. It's a great backdrop if you decide to like bring your studio show live there, let's say like an Amazon or something like that, the vistas of Chicago are awesome, particularly early in the year when it's not that cold. It's a good trip, just like for the broadcasters. And I think that while that's not a big factor on it, if you're excited to be in a stadium or a city, I actually think that has impact on your call. Like, I think it's just human nature. And so again, I think the league would really like to see the Bears. I don't necessarily think they're like saying we need the Bears to be like the new Chiefs. I just think they need them to be competitive. They need them to be a factor in the NFL, because for too many years, like, you've just eliminated one of the biggest population markets in the country, because that team has not been relevant nationally. And it would be really interesting to see what would happen if they ever were.
Richard, it's remarkable to think about how much the NFL has turned the offseason into like almost like in season, with the amount of ratings they can pull in for the draft. The spectacle that even just releasing a schedule where we already know the opponents from the time the season ends, what it's become. I've always thought about, and I saw this idea floating around on social media a little bit too, I think ahead of the schedule being released. It's like if the networks had a draft for these games, and like how much interest that would actually draw if you literally had, ESPN, CBS, Fox. We already know the matchups, draft the games to their networks, and then I guess figure out the scheduling later. That probably just creates more of a headache for Mike North. But it would, to me, I mean, I would care. I know my co-host here, Adam Jahns, would not, but I would watch it.
Yeah, here's the problem with that. The networks would never want that, because they don't want their competitors to know sort of what they're thinking and how they prioritize games. I'll give you an example. This year, Fox really lobbied hard with the NFL to get as many Cowboys games early in the year as they could versus later in the year. Last year, they had a strategy where they backloaded their schedule with a lot of good games, and they ended up getting a lot of blowouts for Fox early, so the numbers went down, and then the back end games weren't so hot. So this year, they're really starting early with the Cowboys because they think they can get some momentum in terms of their schedule. Now, while the networks probably are more the competition between the networks is nowhere near as heated as it used to be. Mostly, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too. A lot of people work for different places, just in general in the media. It's not as sort of over the top competitive, but like I can tell you, like Fox, it matters to Fox to have the highest viewed 4:25 p.m. window. One, it's a source of pride for them, and two, like there's money on the line. You can go to advertisers and say, hey, we have the most watched window for any content play that exists today. Here's our advertising number. CBS actually last year, off an amazing schedule, they beat Fox for the first time. I think it was 13 or 14 years at 4:25. And trust me, they're going to market to advertisers and media buyers and say, hey, if you want to advertise on CBS. We have far and away the best, late afternoon schedule. So it does matter. Like this stuff, like does matter. And then to get back to your point, I just don't think the strategy people within the networks would ever want how they think about stuff to be broadcast publicly, because who knows the next year, you know what I'm saying, if another network then uses sort of their strategy against them. What's really interesting, and again, obviously I've never worked for a network, so I don't know, but it would be great to eavesdrop on some of the network executives trying to lobby the NFL for games, because they all do it. And the NFL says, like, we take all our partners' suggestions and we try to factor it into the schedule. But that's where relationships matter. For a long time, ESPN's relationship with the NFL was horrific. A lot of that had to do with just because ESPN was doing some pretty hard journalism on them, concussions and stuff like that. And so they'd pay a fortune of money, and you'd look at the Monday Night Football schedule, and it was like, Southwestern State versus Cheeseburger U. It was like they weren't getting great games. Their relationship's a lot better now. And if you look at the Monday Night Football schedule, it's a million times better. So like these relationships matter. And like the stuff that happens behind the scenes matters. And that's pretty fascinating to me, is if you were a network executive, like one, what's your top 5 game? And two, how much do you push the NFL to really give you one? Like, if you were like, I really want that Chiefs 49ers rematch, and you really let the NFL, like, this would be the game of the year. you're willing to send out, all your people on site. You're willing to do, I'm just making something like a week's worth of pre-show stuff, maybe they give it to you. And if that's the case, maybe you just landed a 30 million viewership game, and that could be a significant amount of money depending on the ads that you bring in.
With the Bears drafting Caleb Williams, I'm kind of curious about this. Like, how much influence does like star power have on, like, I know the best teams have the best players and all that. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, the Chiefs are an amazing team, but like, you still get these stars like a Justin Herbert on kind of like a middling team. Like, how much influence does that have on decision making, the lobbying have you when it comes to all this?
Big time. The NFL markets its sport around quarterbacks. So if you have a star quarterback, that's the ball game. And if you watch any of the networks, how do they market all these games, right? Mahomes versus, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow versus Josh Allen. It's not T. Higgins versus whomever, right? It's the quarterback. So if you have a star quarterback, the networks, I think, look at your team much differently. And anytime I've ever talked to like sports division heads, presidents, etc., they always, when they're discussing their schedule, they talk about, we have Burrow, we have Allen, we have Jalen Hurts. It's not, again, we have, name Aaron Donald, name your defensive star. It's always rotate. It's always thought around the quarterback. So I think it makes a difference. If Caleb Williams turns out to be, one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the NFL, that's going to change the Bears schedule in terms of national appearances. It's just reality. Again, look at the teams that, generally speaking, have the best windows in the NFL. And it's, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Before he got hurt, the Bengals started getting really hot with Joe Burrow. Back in the day, Manning, Brady, that's all the Cowboys are the only exception to the rule. It doesn't really matter who's their quarterback. You obviously don't want a quarterback that's terrible, but it doesn't really matter who their quarterback is, because that is the one team historically that just draws viewership no matter what. That you can do, a million words on the why. Does it go back to the fact that they were always on TV in the 70s and 80s? Is it something else, the marketing of the team, etc.? But that's the only team that's the exception to the rule where, and I don't think Dak Prescott's a bad quarterback, but if the Cowboys had, let's sort of think of a really, if the Cowboys had Zach Wilson, as their quarterback, I don't think the schedule this year would change at all. So they're the one exception to the rule to me.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I have a bold prediction I haven't shared yet on the show.
All right.
I think Caleb Williams is going to be hosting SNL within the next 5 years.
You do?
Because I think he has. That is 100%. I mean it, because I think we've already seen
on May 21st, 2024.
Yeah, I mean, what else are we doing here in May of the NFL season?
I love the fact that you think it's still going to be on the air. That's a good prediction too.
There we go. That's a good point. Maybe that's the boldest of all the predictions. But if you get somebody like that, obviously that increases, that's proof in itself that these networks, want somebody like that, even off a football game.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, personality matters. Like, swagger matters. I mean, if you did a rate, not rating's not the right word. If you asked NFL fans like who the 10 most popular people are in the NFL, Travis Kelce would definitely be top 10, right? For sure,
yeah.
Just name recognition. So like that stuff matters. And so if Caleb Williams could get to a point where he sort of crosses over into popular culture, I think that would be significant. In terms of Saturday Night Live, I'm just sort of trying to think. I know Peyton Manning hosted, right? I'm trying to think of the NFLer. It seems like it's not an easy one all the time. Walter Payton may have hosted that show if you're thinking about
JJ Watt?
Maybe.
JJ Watt. No, JJ Watt did it recently. Kelsey did it. Our producer's saying Aaron Rodgers. I don't remember that.
Brady ever host?
I thought Tom Brady did.
Yeah, he might have. I'm just saying, like, if he can get to that level, that's rarefied air. That's a good prediction, but it's that would be impressive if he becomes that. And I think in order to, let's say, host a Saturday Night Live or to have those kind of opportunities, you probably got to win. Like it's they're going to have to probably win a Super Bowl for Caleb to sort of get into that level. But a lot of times it also only takes one. You win one Super Bowl and people just think of you differently as a as a personality or like, I know it's a 2024 word, but as a brand. And it does, again, that kind of publicity, I think, does help everything, including make a franchise more attractive to broadcasting entities. The other thing I would say, just for the people who are listening to us to watch, is like, pay attention to the viewership rating of that week 2 game. That's going to tell you, I think, a lot in terms of where the Bears are, because as interesting as CJ Stroud is and that team is, the Texans are by no means any kind of viewership power at all, have no history of it. Quite frankly, they have the opposite history of it. And so if that game pops, that will tell you that there's national interest in the Bears this year because of their draft. If the game is just let's say it matches like whatever the week 2 was the year before, or is down, that will tell you something as well. But I knowing ESPN, which sort of, as a general rule, sort of overhypes everything, I think they're going to really sell this game because it's an easy marketing sort of sell in the fact that come and watch maybe what will be like the next generation of great quarterbacks in the league.
Absolutely. Well, Richard, I have 1,000 other questions I can ask you about with Tom Brady and Greg Olsen, all this other stuff. But here's the good news. You host a podcast that covers all that stuff, and you cover it all for The Athletic too. So I'll direct our listeners and viewers that way. Make sure you're checking out all of Richard's coverage, and the podcast is Sports Media with Richard Deitsch. I highly recommend checking it out. There's always interesting stuff on there. So, Richard, thank you so much for jumping on with us.
Great. Thank you. Keep up the great work, fellas.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Richard Deitsch from The Athletic. And Kent is pointing out that the last three NFL players to host SNL, JJ Watt, Eli Manning, and Peyton Manning, which I do remember now that you say that Eli hosted as well. Also, one correction.
Was Travis Kelce in there? No?
Yeah. Kelsey did it last year, I think.
Yeah.
I want to say. So I don't, plenty have done it, but all of those names are huge names, and they're all players, I think, other than Watt, have won a Super Bowl. So that's unless we're going all the way back to, no, yeah. So that's definitely not necessarily a prerequisite, but also helps the situation as well. And again, because I know a lot of our listeners are going to point it out, yes, the Bears Texans game is Sunday Night Football, and that's an NBC game, not ESPN. There's a lot of games to keep track of. So
when I covered the Blackhawks, this is the year that they won the first Stanley Cup, but this is before they won it. When they had the Olympics, the Vancouver Olympics, where everybody was excited about that. They had some gold medal winners and they had some silver medal winners, and they were all invited to the Jay Leno show. I remember that. It was part of the trip out to LA. We all went. The media went too. You start winning, you get on TV in different ways.
Was that famous West Coast trip with all the drama?
Which one? There was a few back in the day.
There was something with a limo and
oh yes, no, that was a different one. That was with their shirts off, drinking the coconut.
Yeah.
John Madden, Christopher Steigen, Patrick Kane.
Yeah,
that was the same season.
Good shirt for me to be wearing today as we bring hockey into the conversation. Shout out to Game 7, Canucks and Oilers last night. All right, we got to roll here, but real quickly, number one thing you want to see at OTAs this week, besides Caleb Williams throwing all his weapons, it's a given.
Well, then I got nothing.
Oh, come on.
What I was gonna say, well, yes, I would like to see. I want to see that, but more than I felt like last year, like starting in OTAs, it just became DJ Moore, Justin Fields, DJ Moore.
Yes.
And that was it. It's all that worked. Cole Kmet had a couple good days in there. We saw that work. But how about like Caleb Williams, Keenan Allen, Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Caleb Williams, Cole Kmet, Caleb Williams, Roma Duinze. That's what I want to see. Like an offense build chemistry, not just players.
I will.
How about that? That was good.
No,
I should write that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of didn't quite fit the requirements for the question, but I'll give it to you because it is important that it's not just what it all looks like, but your point is that it's not just Caleb throwing the one wide receiver, that it looks spread out, that it looks good to everybody. And I do think that's important. And I do think that's not when I think we've almost gone all the way to the other end where too many people are like, none of this matters. They're in shorts. And I've seen too many examples of stuff we see in May actually translate to September and October. That I do think there are things like that that do matter. And 100% last year, Justin looking good with DJ Moore and none of the other wide receivers. It's exactly what we saw during the season, basically. And more stock should have been put in that maybe than it actually was. I will go to the line of scrimmage, which is always tough this time of year because that's let me be very specific with this because that's actually part of the stuff I would put in the stuff to the categories of probably doesn't matter as much until the pads go on, at least in training camp, because it is line of scrimmage. You're not wearing pads. That being said, I want to see what Gervon Dexter looks like. I want to size him up. I want to see, does he look quicker? What is his get off? Because that's something you can look at. Just that very specific thing. Because I think Gervon Dexter and his step from year 1 to year 2, given that the Bears really didn't add much. In fact, they've lost Justin Jones and they still haven't really replaced Justin Jones. That's telling me that they think they have something in Gervon Dexter and throw Zach Pickens in there too, potentially. But what do those two guys look like here in OTAs?
I take more note of, because everything you just said, that the offensive, defensive linemen aren't in full pads. And I think that's a factor in how they play. You can't really go full go when you're not padded up. It's different. I want to see very smooth 7-on-7 drills because that's essentially what this entire offseason program is. Setting up the passing game. Let's see how efficient Caleb Williams can be and see how fast the ball gets out.
All right. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. Greatly appreciate everybody being here, watching, listening. Please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button. Please rate and review the pod if you're listening the old-fashioned way, through your car, through your phones, whatever. That's also how you can find Richard Deitsch and his sports media podcast, which I highly recommend. Thank you for him for jumping on the show today. And we will be back next week to recap everything we saw at OTAs. And we will do it in depth as we always do. Looking forward to being out there on the practice field, seeing what it all looks like. We've seen the rookies, but what does it look like with the whole team? We will wrap all that up. Now, on next week's episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns, and at Hogan Jahns is the show account. HoganJahns.com is where you can get all the merch. Get those golf polos. Get those quarter zips. Go find it all right now. And the t-shirts, HoganJahns.com. That's going to do it for us. Talk to you next time.
See ya.